We're going to get started. Everybody, please stand for the pledge.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. The roll call, please, Amy.
Okay. Mr. Anise? Mr. Arcuri? Mr. Bova? Mr. Brodsky?
Here.
Mr. Coyne?
Here.
Mr. Dalia?
Here.
Mr. Ford?
Here.
Mr. Karam?
Here.
Mr. Mutolo? Mr. Sampson? Ms. Sesney?
Here.
Okay, thank you.
You have the draft minutes from our September 19, 2022 meeting. Is there a motion to approve?
Aye. Second.
Any corrections, deletions, additions? All those in favor?
Aye.
Anybody opposed? Thank you. Our first matter is a resolution approving the water rates for the fiscal year 2023, and that is in your packet. Yes, Pat?
I can also just take a minute. I just wanted to introduce everybody to Alexis Menorish from the Daily Sentinel. Some of you know that the Sentinel's been expanding in this area. They now have an office on Bleecker Street. Is that where it is?
It's not Bleecker, Broad Street.
Broad Street, I'm sorry. Yeah, somewhere out there. At any rate, so Alexis was at the rate hearing last Monday, wanted to come back and see how the vote goes. So in case you're wondering who this new face is, I just wanted to let you know.
A real newspaper for the area.
A real newspaper, that's right. But we did have the rate hearing last week, and a couple of people came, 2 people spoke, obviously against it, but otherwise they wouldn't bother coming down if they were in favor of it. So anyway, thank you.
Is there anything you wanted to say about the resolution?
I can speak for hours on it. No.
2 minutes will do it.
Well, we had a budget workshop. Everybody, most of you were here and participated. It is a 4.85% rate increase. It's a little over $20 a year, or $1.72 a month for the average family of 4, based on 55,000 gallons a year of usage. At the rate hearing, I did explain a number of reasons why it was necessary. Predominantly, one of the biggest ones is that in order to fund our capital program, we project a bond sale, which is also on the agenda for a little bit later. And the new debt service anticipated with that bond sale will be about $555,000 a year, which is a little over 2% on the rate structure. So when you deduct that from the 4.85, it really means that the whole rest of the budget is only going up about 2.5%, while inflation is running between 9 and 10%, depending on who you ask. One of the ways we were able to do that is because we are seeing some new revenue coming in. The Wolfspeed plant predominantly is the main driver of that. And with the expected $700,000 a year or so from Wolfspeed, that covers more than a 2.5% rate increase. So that really helped out a lot. The other thing I want to just point out as of note is that there is, and we approved this last year, but there continues to be, finally, as we get it in place, a 2.5% fee assessed back to the customer now on credit cards, because we were beginning to lose an awful lot of revenue covering that fee on behalf of the customers with the bank, which also included sewers, because they pay for sewer on the same bill. Last thing I should mention is that, as a friendly reminder to the public, this rate increase only pertains to the water piece of the bill, because we do bill for water and sewer. If you live in Utica, you get water consumption, county sewer, and city sewer. And this bill, this increase only applies to the water consumption piece, not any of the sewer charges. So not the entire bill is going up by 4.85%. The projected $1.72 a month is the increase on the water portion of it only. So, and if there's any further questions on it, me or Jim Corfanta are here to answer those.
And I also note that our rate consultant,
Oh, I'm sorry.
everybody's
Yes,
got a copy of the letter.
Thank you.
Yes, under
And you will have her the record.
Under our enabling legislation, we are required to have an outside rate consultant that reviews the projected rate structure to projected budget, runs a number of tests to make sure that we meet all of the covenant requirements we have with the bondholders. And that letter is here. The rate consultant has reviewed it. Jim and Geraldine and the rest of the accounting staff did a great job providing all that information to our rate consultant, and it is certified that it works.
Pat, in the rates and fees booklet, we did update some of the fees primarily for the increase in costs. So there's a couple changes we made, small changes, but overall. But that rates and fees booklet encompasses the increase in the rates in various sections. So that's all been updated.
There you go.
Anything else, Pat?
Not unless there's any questions.
Any questions regarding the resolution? Someone care to move the resolution as presented? Thank you, Vince. A second? Rich? Any further discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Anybody opposed? Thank you. Next item is approval of the budget for 2023.
Again, without being too redundant, the budget includes minor increases in operating expenses. We've been able to keep those down through a variety of ways of postponing some projects or equipment purchases and other means to keep expenses down as low as we can. But there is new debt service in here for next year's budget based on anticipated borrowing to support the capital plan. The other thing of note is that, as you may recall, we typically budget for a deficit, which means that we do rely on reserves that have been built up over past operating years to be introduced back into this budget as a revenue line. We've done this in the past and have not had to draw on it in recent years, because with vacancies that occur throughout the year and other things, we just haven't had to spend that money. But we do take surplus funds from prior operating years, introduce them into this budget to help offset the rate increase. We've done that this year to the tune of $1.5 million. Otherwise, the rate increase would be a lot higher, obviously.
And again, I remind everybody that this takes a matter of months. It's not something we're looking at all for the first time. Department heads, senior staff, budget workshops.
This we started this in August, so August 1st.
Any questions for Pat regarding this, or Jim? Is there a motion to approve the budget? Thank you, Mark. A second? We have a couple over there.
Denny?
Any further discussion, comments? All those in favor?
Aye.
Anybody opposed? Thank you. Next item, approval of the extension of contract for the water treatment plant. We have not seen that, Pat?
Pardon? No, what we had last time was a 5-month extension. So when we made the decision to outsource the operation of the water treatment plant, we hired, at the time, the company was called Suez. We did a full-blown RFP process, request for proposals. We had 3 strong proposals from Suez, another company called Veolia, another company called American Water. Since then, Veolia has purchased Suez, so we are now dealing with Veolia. But the contract year ran August to July, excuse me. And we wanted to move it to the fiscal year for a number of reasons, to match our fiscal year, which is also the calendar year. So what you approved more recently was a 5-month extension, because the first 5-year engagement actually ran out August 1st. So we did a bridge to get to January 1. In the meantime, we're now looking at a renewal with the first opening to renew or to get out within 5 years or upon proper notice. I want to thank Phil Tangora, who headed up most of the negotiation with Veolia, as they're now called. It's essentially the same people, other than John Arnott, that some of you knew over the years, has been restationed by the company downstate to Long Island. We do have a new regional manager, but he doesn't live here, but we do see him fairly regularly. One thing of note was that when we outsourced this thing 5 years ago. The contract cost in that first year was essentially within a few $1,000s, the same as our internal cost, you doing it with our own employees. It went up, it went down a little bit, but right now, the renewal of the starting next year is essentially the same cost, but a couple $100,000 higher, predominantly because of the increase in chemical costs and also the activated carbon that we use in the filter beds. We've seen those shoot up dramatically. But we did a little bit of fine tuning in the contract. We went back and forth over some of the chemical ordering processes to make sure that, that we're paying for the actual quantities. As I said, Phil did a very good job. Worked very closely with Ken Bobrow, our general counsel. Ken could not be here today, but he has reviewed all this and has given his okay after several go-arounds of questions back and forth with Veolia. So as far as Ken is concerned, as well as Phil, Jim Corfanta and I have all reviewed it. We think this is ready to go. No major changes since the last contract, other than we just kind of shored up a little bit about how we order chemicals to make sure that we're paying for the actual quantities used. Other than that, there's no major changes. Phil, did I miss anything, or you want to add anything?
No, really, the monthly billing or truing up for chemical cost is going to help us, I think. They're going to handle all vehicle purchases for up there, so we have a couple vehicles that their employees have used, and those will come back down here. They'll be responsible for that as part of the process now. And then just the annual review of their expenditures related to the sludge cap and the maintenance fund.
Yep. Other than that, we think it's ready to go, and it's still a good concept. So we recommend it.
I'm confused, Pat.
Yeah.
We haven't seen the contract.
Oh, if the contract is the same. The only thing that's really there is just the addendum for the extension.
So the last time we did the extension, that doesn't count?
The last extension was just for 5 months to get us up to January 1. So what we're looking at now is essentially an addendum to just continue the existing contract with some minor modifications, as Phil just described. Other than that, all other contract provisions are the same. It's for another 5-year engagement.
So we're talking about the 5-year contract.
Yes.
Yeah. And again, it's a couple of page addendum, just kind of renewing the existing contract with some minor modifications in language, which Ken has reviewed and said looks good to him.
There'll be an opportunity if we wanted to at the end of 5 years to extend it an additional 5 years without, going through the process again.
Or get out of it upon written notice if we decide that it's not working anytime between now and the next 5 years.
We didn't see it.
Okay. Well, one of the reasons why is we only got the final language back about 3 o'clock this afternoon. So, but we had earlier versions. If you want to wait and vote on this in November, we can do that too. It doesn't take effect till January.
Yes.
Yes. Okay.
So I want the extension to come to we don't have to see the whole original contract, which we've already approved, but I want to see the extension.
Okay. Okay. We can do that.
Thanks.
Yep. No problem.
Then I won't be so confused.
Yes. All right. Get confused.
Yeah. Then bonding. This is the letter, Pat, that we send over to the.
To the Water Finance Authority, the other board that is the that's the borrowing wing of the organization. So as you may know, we have 2 boards because the rate setting and the ability to borrow was separated between 2 different boards rather than putting it all in one body. And so the mechanism has been that when this board has a capital program that includes a list of projects that we want to use borrowed money for rather than operating funds, and that helps to stabilize the rates. The request goes from this board to the Finance Authority board, and then they kick off the process of putting together the bond issue to acquire those funds and have it put in our construction fund. So the Capital Committee met, 5-6 weeks ago at this point, reviewed the proposed capital project list for the next 2 years and made some modifications to it. But what emerged was a punch list of projects that is about $9 million. And again, debt service for that borrowing is built into the budget. The reason it's coming to you now on somewhat short notice is because Eric just found out that two of the projects that were listed are water main replacement jobs that are going to be done by the state DOT, Genesee Street, and what's the other one? Champlin Ave. I always want to say Commercial Drive. Champlin Ave. It's one of those things we call a target of opportunity. So they're going to be redoing the whole road. They're going to have it open. They're going to close it. And all we're asking is that they address the water main there. We give them the money. They build it into their spec. They bid it. Then we don't have to pay for any of the restoration costs. So it's much cheaper for us to have the main replaced, tagging along their contract instead of doing it on our own. But Eric just found out that in order for them to build that into their specs to get that done next year, they want to have the money in their account by January. So now we're realizing that we really need to kick off the bonding sooner rather than taking our time and do it in maybe 2 or 3 months. I will also say that our financial advisor in New York City, Rick McCarthy, some of you know, has told us that the bond rates are somewhat stable, but they're inching up, and there's no way to know for sure how much further they might go up over the next few months. So his general feeling was better to do it sooner rather than later to lock in better rates before they start climbing. Some of you may have heard the Federal Reserve is already talking about raising rates another 3/4 of a point. So eventually that's going to trickle into the bond market. So at this point, based on the Capital Committee's recommendation for the 2 years of work, we do have a request ready if this board wants to pull the trigger on it to get the Finance Authority.
What part of Genesee Street is involved?
Eric, what part of Genesee Street?
From the Route A Bridge all the way out to Utica National. So if you remember, I think like 20 years ago, they did that project right in front of Yanadasas, and where that water main replacement essentially ended, we'll be coming up to that point. So all the way through the village and up Oxford.
So we need a resolution,
No, it's just,
well, we need to approve this letter.
right, so it would just be a motion to authorize me to sign this and send it over to the Finance Authority, initiating the bonding request.
I'll move it.
Oh, okay.
Rich, thanks. Any further comments on this? All those in favor? Anybody opposed? Thank you.
All right, great. So we'll send that to Vin Gilroy, who's the chair of the Finance Authority, and get the ball rolling on that.
Jim, the third quarter.
Yes. I believe in your packet is the third quarter investment statement ending September 30th, 2022. A reminder, Public Authorities Law requires that we provide you with a statement of investments, any earnings on those investments to date, and any related expenses. So these are primarily repair and improvement funds and our money, primarily reserve money that's in these the various bondings that we've accumulated over the years. So it's a 3-page statement. Just a note that it looks like a lot of these investments, as they become due, we can reinvest them for a lot higher rates because the treasuries, CDs are actually going up as we speak. So it's good for us. We're going to receive more income than anticipated.
Any questions for Jim regarding this? We need a motion to approve it. Thanks, Bruce, a second. Thanks, Rich. Any further discussion? All those in favor? Anybody opposed? Thank you. September Finance Report. Jim?
Yes. Also in your packet is the September 30th, 2022 monthly financial report. Water sales for the year is up $252,000 over budget, so that's good. Consumption is up 8.6% compared to the prior year. That's primarily because of Wolfspeed. Wolfspeed makes up a good portion of that. And then cash flow, we're up 1.2 million, which is pretty much the same as the prior month. We need those dollars because we have retirement and different insurances that we pay out in December. So we need to have that surplus because we use it.
What was the impact of people working from home instead of going into work in businesses. And is that, how do you got that projected into the future?
So far, we haven't seen that big of an impact. Yes, we were just talking about that, and specifically Utica National. I wonder how that building. I don't know what they used before, but it'd be something to look at because I know that many of those folks work remotely. So don't know the impact, but we haven't seen it. Consumption is still up for the year, or at least stable for the year.
I think when you have an office setting that doesn't have manufacturing or large use of water for some kind of processing, and it's essentially bathrooms or a kitchenette, whatever activity is not happening in that building is then just dispersed back to the household level as people stay home. So we haven't, as Jim said, we haven't seen much of a difference.
Any other questions for Jim? Thanks. Pat?
So everybody got the email last week, I'm assuming, on the water quality notice that we had to send out. Phil, your estimate on, pardon me? Did you get, yeah. Did you, what's the latest count on phone calls estimated at the lab?
Probably 150
Just today.
today. Well, over Saturday messages, Sunday messages, yeah.
So, just a very, very quick review. The violation occurred with the level of something called THMs, which some of you, if you've been around long enough, remember years ago was a major concern with this water system before there was a filter plant. THMs falls into the category of something called disinfection byproducts. It occurs when organic matter like leaves and vegetation interacts with chlorine. The problem is that both temperature and time exacerbate that interaction. So the warmer the water is, the faster the reaction happens. The longer it goes on, time-wise, the higher the level climbs. It doesn't level off and peak. And so we sample for that quarterly from 8 different locations. The violation was only at one location over near the airport business park. We have 2 tanks over there. It's a system that we inherited. We've made numerous adjustments over there with the pump stations, et cetera, to make the system more reliable. The tanks aren't sized properly. Eric has plans on a drawing board to eventually replace those 2 tanks with one. The problem when the tanks are not sized properly is that the water doesn't turn over in them fast enough, so the water can get a little bit older. They do it on a 4-quarter rolling average, which means that every time we take a new sample, the last one drops off, and they average it every time we do it. We only found out recently that in May, that sample for the 4-quarter average came out at 81 parts per billion. The level's 80. So we exceeded it by 1 part per billion. The health department didn't realize that until later. They told us that. And then by the time the August sample was taken, the average came out to 83 instead of 80. So we're just a hair over that limit. We do expect by the November sample, the average will be dropping back down. We're already seeing the number coming down from some monitoring that Phil's been doing. Important thing to note is that THMs are on a list of known contaminants that can potentially be carcinogenic if ingested in high levels for long-term exposure, decades. Our position right now is that this temporary exceedance over that limit for a fairly short period of time really doesn't elevate anybody's health risk, not in any way that could be measured at least. Some of the questions that have come up in response to the postcards that went out, which by the way are required by the health department, I should just talk about that for a second. Even though this violation occurred at only one site and it's geographically limited to that area, the health department under state department rules say that there's mandatory notice where everyone in the system has to get notified. There's mandatory language that then has to be included. It was a little bit of a negotiation, again, with Phil, with the health department, to be able to send out just a postcard with the link to the website for the full language, rather than having to do a whole separate mailing with actual letters with all that language right in it. So that saved us some postage, at least, being able to send the postcards. But one of the main questions we had is, you know, even though I live in Utica or New Hartford, how far away do you have to be from that area? Even if you were drinking right out of that tank, again, the elevated level was only just a hair above the limit. But the further you get away from it, because of the grid of the intersecting pipes and water coming from different directions, it gets diluted the further and further you go. There's no way to really say it's a half a mile distance or it's a mile. It just gradually, dissipates. And the other 7 sites that were sampled were all under the limit. So, again, very limited in area, short duration, but nevertheless, it was required by health department rules. So we'll do the best we can to answer all the questions. We fully expect that next month, when the next round of samples takes place, we'll be back down. So it takes careful monitoring, and it has to do with how much chlorine is in the system at a time and how warm the water is, and it's somewhat unpredictable. And we're going to run, some risk of this while those tanks are in service until we can do something different. So that's kind of what it comes down to. If there's any questions, I'm sure either Phil or Eric would be happy to take them. But I think that kind of covers it. So
Before we leave that, Pat, I think it's important to note what you said earlier, which it was that these tanks were inherited by the system. They were not put together by the system. They primarily served the Oneida County Business Park. I've already had a brief conversation with the county executive regarding that aspect of things. We know how much it's going to cost to try to replace those tanks, something like 11 million, was it?
$11 million.
So we're going to revisit that issue with the county executive to see if there might be some common ground to square that away. But again, it primarily serves the Oneida County Business Park.
I have a question. Yes. Is this a matter of age, chlorine, or exposure to the organic material?
It's a matter of the amount of chlorine in the water, the age of the water, the temperature of the water.
How do the organics get in? I thought we had a closed system.
I'm saying it again.
it happens at Hinckley Reservoir.
So it's coming through the pipe.
So we remove around 75 to 80% of the organic material that comes in the raw water, right? The board has invested 10, 11 years ago, right? 6, 7, up to $1 million for replacement of granular activated carbon, GAC, to remove the majority of those organics. There's still a small fraction that remains, that 20%. And because of the length of time it takes for the water to move through that system over there, you have time for these reactions to occur. Temperature's going down, we expect those numbers to go down. We're moving water a little differently now, we expect those numbers to go down. I think it's important to note too that, we do take this seriously. We intend to be compliant across the board at all times. The average, Pat talked about the longer risks, right? Long-term risks. The average, since we've been monitoring over there, is 64 parts per billion. But we did have this exceedance over the last couple months, but we do fully think that we'll be back in compliance after November samples.
And just to add to that for a minute, there was a rule, they called it the disinfection byproduct stage 2 rule, that took place many years ago. We did a lot of studies on how to comply with that. We were in compliance a year ahead of schedule when those regulations finally hit, and it was two-pronged. One was, how do we get more organic matter out of the water when the leaves wash into Hinckley Reservoir? And the change, as Phil said, was to, instead of using a silica-based filtering medium, like basically sand, we replaced it with activated carbon, which gets more of the organic molecules out right up front before we add the chlorine. But on the flip side, we also had open reservoirs within the system, Deerfield, Marcy, Southern Reservoir, where the water was exposed to, more vegetation, birds, you name it, where we had to rechlorinate as it went back out into the system. So by replacing those reservoirs with closed tanks, we're not doing nearly as much rechlorinating throughout the system. So we've lowered the amount of chlorine that we need to have a residual throughout the whole system. So it's been a two-pronged approach, and it's been pretty successful. But we did have this situation predominantly because the water got pretty warm this year. It was a warm summer.
And it doesn't turn over.
And it doesn't turn over.
Antiquated tanks.
But in the old days, and Eric can back me up on this, I think, when people were designing tanks, the bigger concern was having storage to fight fires. So, the theory for a long time was the bigger the better. The more water you have, the safer we're going to be from fires. But then all these water quality issues came in, and they realized it's got to be sized optimally so the water doesn't get too old. You have to have it turn over fairly regularly. So you gotta kind of match your inflow and your outflow and have that buffer for a fire. But 10 million gallons isn't necessarily better than 2 million gallons from that regard.
Yeah, and I think you can remember many years ago when we were first doing the system, a lot of money was spent on looping.
Right.
There were a lot of pipes went out, but they didn't have a loop, so they looped them to make sure that the water didn't stagnate very long.
Which we don't have out there, dead ends out there, right?
Well, that may be part of the problem.
I don't know, but I can tell you when they passed these regulations at the federal level, they told us where the sampling points would be, picking the worst case scenarios. So whatever those worst case scenarios are based on an engineering analysis is where they told us we had to sample. But I don't think any of them are on dead ends, right?
What were you referring to?
If the water's not turning over sufficiently out at the airport, is that sort of like the end of the system and there's no place else?
It's on the outer reach. We have looked at some redundancy feeds to that area, but you're still dealing with the tank issue. You have tanks oversized for what's there.
Yeah, the tanks have been a problem ever since we took over the system. They were put in improperly in the first place. And we just never spent the money. We would have spent the money if we'd gone through with the Indian pipe. It would have worked out for us to do it. But
So the state of New York basically hurt our ability to fix the problem.
Right.
And now the state of New York is saying you have a problem.
Yeah.
Yes.
Sounds right.
Anything
Well,
else,
that's
Pat?
over.
Eventually, I'll get to some things, yes.
you got something else?
I have a few more things. Everybody's aware of our concern about the metering system and aging out, and we do have a meeting this Wednesday morning with Neptune Meters. They're going to have a couple representatives on site. Ken Bobrow, our attorney, will be here, as well as some of our staff, and also the consultant that the board approved hiring will be joining us virtually on screen from his office up in Massachusetts. But we're at a point now where they've completed their radio studies. They're ready to recommend different technology to us, and we will be beginning the process of discussing that whole transition and how it's going to work.
Yes.
Monthly billing.
Yeah.
It's been years now.
I know.
What do we do to start to implement monthly billing?
The system that we've had in place was supposed to be able to do that, and it's been deficient. So that's on our hit list of things that are going to be addressed as we talk about transitioning to a new system. We're going to need to be able to do that, and we haven't really had the ability to draw down those readings consistently in order to be able to do that. So that is one of the higher priorities that they have on their list of things that they need to address as they sit down with us. So yeah, we intend to do that.
I'd like to see a schedule. I mean, I was, told that the problem was the bank. And then we solved the bank problem. And there were a couple of other problems that we had, but we kept solving those problems. The problem, we don't have our water bill is not creating the problem, the need for monthly billing. Our water bill is not. Because the water bill is 45% most of the time on average, what people are being charged. But I've never been one to say we should split off the sewer and the water. I think it's a community service that's necessary to save costs overall. But the only way we're going to be able to address this is monthly billing, because the sewer bill is just going to get exponentially higher over the next several years because of the consent order. We don't have anything to do with the consent order. We didn't borrow $300 million in order to fix the sewer system, but everybody looks at the water bill and says, oh, look at all these increases that you have. And yes, we have some increases, but most of it's been sewer because it's all on one bill. We need to give people a break.
Oh, I agree. And making it monthly is going to be obviously the better way to manage it. And we'll need to be able to do that electronically. So it's going to involve a couple of conversions. But the AMI system, the automated meter reading, is right at the heart of it. And that's at the, one of the highest priorities that we're going to be discussing with these guys to be able to make that happen. But the software hasn't been able to be reliable enough for us to do that. Now they're talking about a cloud-based software, and it's a whole different program. So, at any rate, that meeting will happen on Wednesday morning. Other thing I wanted to mention is that the one of our collective bargaining agreements, the contract with the Teamsters, expires December 31st of this year. We do have a meeting set up with them for a week from Thursday, November 3rd, to sit down and begin talking about a new contract. I discussed it with the chairman last week, and correct me if I'm wrong or you change your mind, but his intention is to put it to a committee after we sit down with them and figure out where they're going and what they're looking for. So Ellis has told me that we'll put it in a committee for some board review before anything gets settled and comes back to the full board for a vote. But we'll start that process on November 3rd. We'll meet again the next day on the 4th if it's proven productive.
We'll bring it to the finance committee. If for some reason we need a special meeting to get the full board input prior to a final meeting of the board, we could do that as well. But the intent is to get to the bones of it in the finance committee and perhaps come back to the board with a recommendation.
Couple quick things real fast. The pipe loop study that we're doing to look at the new lead and copper rule revisions, the lead levels that are going to be mandated are going to be a little different than what we've been dealing with. Phil's worked pretty closely with Eric and our maintenance people down at the maintenance yard on Campbell Street. They were able to harvest enough lead service pipes taken out of the ground that were actually in use going to houses to have a loop, a test loop set up at our maintenance building on Campbell Street. So there's 12 of them set up, 3 groups of 4. The board previously approved hiring a company called Corona Labs. Nothing to do with the coronavirus, I'm happy to say. But they'll be overseeing the whole chemical experimentation, 12 to 18 months of testing different ways to see if we can neutralize the water even better than we are right now, aka optimizing our corrosion control program to see if we can then comply with those levels without getting into having to rip out a lot of lead pipes, which we may eventually have to do anyway. That's too far down the road to be seen just yet. But to comply with the deadline, we have to have this study done. It's underway. The kickoff is actually a week from Friday, where Phil's invited some people from the State Health Department here, as well as people from Corona Labs, to actually start that whole process. And then we'll be running water through the pipes, testing different alterations in the chemical process.
We're still doing the inventory though.
Yeah. And the vac truck is here. We've been trained on it.
Did we use our new truck?
We've been using it.
So far, so good.
So that's another round of unfunded.
Another unfunded mandate.
Just want to make sure that
Absolutely.
that was after that 30 million.
Yeah.
Oh, probably more than that, but yes. 2 more real quick things. Happy to report that we've crossed right around $2.2 million in collections through postings, etc. Now that the state lifted the moratorium on shutoffs, we were able to go back out after some of these delinquent accounts. Since the moratorium's been lifted, it's been going up. We're right at about $2.19 million collected now. So hats off to both IT managing the billing and customer service managing the payments. We're getting some of that money back now. Final thing I'll just mention very quickly is at the November meeting, besides the Veolia contract, we will also be bringing forth some of those policy statements that the board is required under the Public Authorities Reform Act to review and renew annually. The ones that we have coming your way for November are probably going to be mostly HR policies that remain unchanged. So not to overload the agenda, we'll be spacing them out over several months and putting a couple on each meeting. And again, they're really just to be renewed and reenacted by the board under the state law. So that's all I have for now, unless that's not enough.
Any questions for Pat? Any old business? Any new business? We're adjourned. Thanks, everybody.